The leather hinges of the makeshift courtroom door groaned as Fenna Cragborne stepped through them one final time, her small tusks catching the late afternoon light that slanted through the converted barn's high windows. And she knew with absolute certainty that she was about to lose everything she had been given by a dying man's gratitude. Judge Harlan Lowell sat behind a table that had been dragged from the tavern next door, his face carved from the same granite as the frontier hills surrounding them, his gavel nothing more than a blacksmith's hammer wrapped in cloth. Fenna stood alone in the center of the packed dirt floor, while farmers and ranchers pressed against the walls, their eyes following every movement of her calloused hands as she clutched a bundle of papers to her chest. The air smelled of hay and horse sweat and human fear, though she could not tell if they feared her or feared what her presence meant for the careful order they had built in this borderland. "Miss Cragborne," the judge said, his voice carrying the weight of a man who had pronounced sentence on horse thieves and claim jumpers for 30 years. "This court has reviewed your testimony regarding the verbal bequest of Marcus Henley's western grazing tract. However, without a filed deed or witnessed will, the law recognizes no transfer of title. The property reverts to the territorial trust, and you are hereby ordered to remove yourself and your possessions from the disputed land by dawn tomorrow." Fenna's throat tightened. She had known this moment was coming from the instant she had watched the judge's face harden during her testimony, but knowing did nothing to soften the blow. Marcus had promised her that land, had pressed her hand between his fever-hot palms 3 days before he died, and told her it was hers for the care she had given him through the wasting sickness. She had believed him because he had been the first human in this territory to look at her without hatred. "Your Honor, I nursed him for 4 months," she said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her legs. "He had no family. He told me the land was mine. The court does not dispute your service, miss. The court disputes the absence of legal documentation." Judge Lowell lifted the cloth-wrapped hammer. "Bailiff Thompson, please escort Miss Cragborne from the property at first light tomorrow. This court is adjourned." The hammer fell with a muffled thud that echoed in Fenna's chest like the closing of a tomb door. She turned toward the exit, her vision blurring at the edges, and that was when she heard the scrape of boots on the wooden bench along the side wall. A tall figure rose from the gallery, unfolding from his seat with the deliberate movements of a man who had just made an irrevocable decision. Liam Lowell, the judge's only son, stepped down from the bench and crossed the dirt floor in 4 long strides. He did not look at his father. He did not look at the assembled crowd of ranchers who had come to watch the orc woman be driven from land they all coveted. He simply positioned himself beside Fenna, close enough that his shoulder nearly brushed hers, and walked with her toward the door. The silence that fell over the barn was so complete that Fenna could hear the scuff of her worn boots against the packed earth, the whisper of Liam's canvas coat as his arms swung at his sides, the distant lowing of cattle waiting in the pens outside. She did not understand what was happening. Liam Lowell was a livestock veterinarian, a man who spent his days with his arms inside cows and his nights studying breeding records by lamplight. She had seen him twice before, both times when he had come to examine Marcus's small herd during the old rancher's illness. He had been polite to her, nothing more. They stepped through the door together into the cooling evening air, and only when they were 20 paces from the barn did Fenna dare to stop and turn to him. "What are you doing?" Liam's face was angular and weathered, his dark hair pushed back from his forehead in a way that suggested he had been running his hands through it during the proceedings. His eyes, a warm brown that reminded Fenna of turned earth in spring, met hers without flinching. "I am standing with someone who got cheated. You will anger your father. I expect I already have." Liam glanced back at the barn, where voices were beginning to rise in confused murmurs. Marcus Henley hired me to care for his cattle the last year of his life. He talked about you constantly, Miss Cragborne. He told me what he intended to do with that land. I should have testified to that today, but I did not realize until I was sitting there listening to my father's ruling that I was the witness you needed. Fenna's heart performed a strange, lurching movement in her chest. Why did you not speak? Because I am a coward who did not want to contradict his father in open court. Liam's jaw tightened. But I will not let that cowardice cost you your home. We will find another way to prove Marcus's intent. The door of the barn slammed open, and Judge Lowell emerged with his black coat billowing behind him like thunderclouds. His face was rigid with barely contained fury as he strode toward them, and Fenna instinctively took a half-step back. Liam did not move. What in the name of territorial law do you think you are doing? The judge demanded, stopping 3 paces from his son. You made a spectacle of yourself in my courtroom. I walked out with someone who needed support, Liam said quietly. There is no law against that. You undermined my authority. You suggested to everyone present that I rendered an unjust verdict. Did you? Judge Lowell's face darkened to the color of old brick. I ruled according to the evidence presented. If you possess testimony relevant to this case, you should have offered it during the proceedings. I am offering it now. Marcus Henley told me on 6 separate occasions that he intended to deed his western grazing tract to Miss Cragborne. I can provide dates and witnesses to those conversations. The judge's hands curled into fists at his sides. Then you can provide them at a formal hearing, through proper channels, not through this theatrical display of solidarity. Do you understand what you are risking? Your reputation, your practice, your standing in this community. I understand that I am finally doing what I should have done 3 hours ago. Liam's voice remained steady, but Fenna could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his breathing had gone shallow. This was costing him more than he wanted to admit. Judge Lowell stared at his son for a long moment, and Fenna saw something shift in the older man's face, something that might have been grief or disappointment or fear. You are making a mistake, Liam. That is my choice to make. The judge turned his gaze to Fenna, and she forced herself to meet his eyes despite every instinct that told her to look away from a human authority figure. You have until dawn tomorrow, Miss Cragborne. If you are still on that land when the bailiff arrives, you will be removed by force. He spun on his heel and strode back toward the barn, his coat snapping in the evening breeze. Fenna released a breath she had not realized she was holding. Her hands were shaking, and she pressed them against her thighs to still them. Your father hates me now. My father hates being contradicted, Liam corrected. There is a difference, but he is also a man who respects evidence and law above all else. If we can prove Marcus's intent, he will reverse his ruling. And if we cannot? Liam looked at her for a long moment, and Fenna felt something warm and dangerous unfurl in her chest at the steadiness of his gaze. Then, I will help you fight the eviction through every legal channel available. You are not facing this alone. That night, Fenna could not sleep. She lay on the narrow cot in the cabin Marcus had built at the edge of the grazing tract, listening to the wind move through the long grass, and trying to understand why Liam Lowell had chosen to stand beside her. She had spent her entire life learning to expect nothing from humans except suspicion and cruelty. Even Marcus's kindness had been a shock, a gift she had not known how to accept until his death had forced her to believe it was real. But Liam had not simply been kind. He had been brave in a way that terrified her because she did not know what it meant, did not know if he was acting out of principle or pity or something else entirely. She thought about the way he had positioned himself beside her in the courtroom, close enough that she had been able to smell the faint scent of leather and medicine that clung to his clothes. She thought about the set of his shoulders as he had faced his father's anger without flinching. Somewhere in the darkest hours before dawn, Fenna admitted to herself that she was half in love with a man who had spoken fewer than 100 words to her. And the knowledge was both thrilling and devastating, because she knew that humans did not fall in love with orcs. Not in this world, not in any world she had ever known. She rose before first light and began packing her few possessions into the canvas sacks she had carried when she first arrived at Marcus's ranch. She had just finished rolling her blankets when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching from the east, too early to be the bailiff. Fenna stepped outside into the gray pre-dawn light and saw Liam riding toward her on a sturdy roan gelding, his medical bag strapped behind the saddle. He dismounted before the horse had fully stopped, his movements quick and urgent. "Do not pack anything else." I spent the night going through Marcus's correspondence in the records office. He wrote to the territorial clerk's office 4 months before he died, filing a formal letter of intent to transfer the property. If that letter still exists, it establishes his wishes legally. Fenna's heart began to hammer against her ribs. Where is the clerk's office? 3 days' ride north, in Millstone Creek. Liam untied the medical bag and pulled out a leather portfolio stuffed with papers. "I brought copies of every document I could find that connects you to Marcus and this land. We leave within the hour. The bailiff will be here at dawn. Then we will not be here when he arrives." Liam met her eyes, and Fenna saw no hesitation in his face, only a fierce determination that made her breath catch. "You have as much right to fight for this land as any human would. More, because you earned it through months of hard labor and compassion. I will not let you surrender without exhausting every option." They rode north as the sun broke over the eastern hills, leaving the grazing tract behind them in a cloud of red dust. Fenna had not ridden a horse in years, and her thighs ached within the first hour, but she did not complain. Liam set a steady pace, stopping only to water the horses and to check his compass when the trail forked. He spoke little during the first day, his attention focused on the road ahead, but Fenna caught him glancing at her several times when he thought she was not looking. They made camp that night beside a narrow creek that cut through a stand of cottonwood trees. Liam built a fire while Fenna tended to the horses, rubbing them down with handfuls of dry grass and checking their hooves for stones. When she returned to the fire, she found Liam heating beans in a battered pot and slicing hardtack with his pocket knife. "You know your way around horses," he said as she settled onto a flat rock across from him. "Did you work with livestock before you came to Marcus?" Fenna nodded. "I grew up on the northern plains, in a settlement that traded with human trappers. I learned to handle horses from the trading caravans." "What brought you south to the borderlands?" Fenna hesitated. She was not accustomed to humans asking about her life as though it mattered. "My settlement was destroyed by a militia raid 5 years ago. I have been moving from place to place since then, looking for work where I could find it. Marcus was the first person who offered me more than day labor." Liam's jaw tightened. "I am sorry. The frontier militias are brutal and stupid, and they have done more harm than the territorial government will ever admit. You do not think orcs are savages who deserve what we get. I think people who judge an entire people by their appearance are the real savages." Liam scooped beans onto 2 tin plates and handed one to Fenna. "I have been a veterinarian for 8 years, Miss Cragborne. I have worked on ranches run by humans, by orcs, by half-bloods, and by people who do not fit any easy category. The quality of a person's character has nothing to do with the color of their skin or the shape of their teeth." Fenna looked down at her plate, her throat tight with an emotion she could not name. "You can call me Fenna. We are traveling together. Formality seems unnecessary." "Then you should call me Liam." He smiled, a quick, lopsided expression that transformed his serious face into something warmer. "Though I warn you, once we are on a first-name basis, I will expect you to help me with the horses every morning. I already did that. Then I suppose we are even." They ate in companionable silence, and Fenna found herself studying Liam's face in the firelight. The sharp line of his nose, the slight crook where it had been broken and healed poorly, the calluses on his hands that spoke of years of hard physical work. He was not handsome in the way of the soldiers and merchants she had seen in border towns, but there was something solid and trustworthy about him, something that made her feel safer than she had felt in years. The second day of travel brought them into rougher country, where the trail narrowed and climbed into pine-covered foothills. The air grew cooler, and Fenna was grateful for the wool coat Marcus had given her during his final winter. Liam rode ahead, navigating switchbacks and rocky stretches with the ease of someone who had traveled this route before. They stopped for lunch beside a waterfall that tumbled down a granite face, and Liam finally asked the question Fenna had been dreading. "Why did you stay with Marcus through his illness? You could have left when it became clear he was dying." Fenna dipped her hands into the cold stream and splashed water on her face before answering. "Because he was alone, and I know what it is like to die alone. My mother died that way after the militia raid. I could not save her, but I could save Marcus from that loneliness." Liam was quiet for a long moment. "He was fortunate to have you." "I was fortunate to have him. He taught me that not all humans see orcs as monsters." Fenna turned to look at Liam, her heart suddenly pounding. "You are like him, I think. You see people instead of categories." "I try." Liam's expression turned thoughtful. "My mother was from the Eastern Territories, from a place where humans and orcs had been trading and intermarrying for generations. She raised me to believe that prejudice was a choice, not a natural law. When she died, I was 12, and my father retreated into law and order as a way to manage his grief. He is not a cruel man, Fenna, but he is afraid of chaos, afraid of anything that threatens the structures he believes keep people safe. He is afraid you will be hurt if you associate with me. He is afraid I will be rejected by the community he has spent 30 years serving, but he does not understand that I cannot build a life worth living if I do so on a foundation of injustice." Liam stood and offered Fenna his hand to help her up. "We should keep moving. I want to reach Millstone Creek by tomorrow afternoon." They arrived in Millstone Creek just as the sun was sliding behind the western peaks, casting long shadows across the cluster of wooden buildings that made up the small mining town. The clerk's office was a narrow structure wedged between a dry goods store and a saloon, its windows dark. Liam hammered on the door until a stooped man with ink-stained fingers opened it a crack and peered out at them. "Office is closed until morning," the clerk said. "This is an urgent matter regarding a property transfer," Liam replied. "We need to search your filed correspondence for a letter of intent written by Marcus Henley 4 months ago." The clerk's eyes flicked to Fenna, and his expression soured. "We do not serve her kind after dark." Liam's hand shot out and caught the door before the clerk could close it. "The territorial statutes make no distinction regarding office hours based on the race of the petitioner. You will open this office, or I will file a formal complaint with the territorial administrator in the morning." The clerk hesitated, then pulled the door open with obvious reluctance. 10 minutes. That is all you get." The office was cramped and dusty, its walls lined with shelves crammed with leather-bound ledgers and boxes of loose papers. The clerk lit a lamp and pointed toward a section labeled with dates from the previous year. Correspondence is filed by month of receipt. If your man's letter is here, it will be in those boxes." Liam and Fenna worked side by side, pulling down boxes and sorting through sheaves of water-stained papers. Fenna's hands trembled as she unfolded letter after letter, searching for Marcus's distinctive cramped handwriting. The clerk watched them from his desk, his face pinched with disapproval, and Fenna tried to ignore the familiar weight of human disdain pressing down on her shoulders. They had searched through 5 boxes when Liam suddenly went very still. "Fenna." She crossed to his side and looked down at the paper in his hands. It was a letter written on Marcus Henley's personal stationery, addressed to the Territorial Land Office, formally declaring his intent to transfer his western grazing tract to Fenna Cragborne in gratitude for her service during his final illness. The letter was dated, signed, and stamped with the clerk's official seal of receipt. Fenna's vision blurred with tears. "That is it. That is the proof." Liam carefully folded the letter and tucked it into his portfolio. "This letter establishes Marcus's intent as a matter of legal record. My father cannot ignore this." The clerk scowled. "You are going to take that to Judge Lowell. He will not be pleased that his son is advocating for an orc squatter." "My father will be pleased that justice is being served," Liam said coldly. "And if you refer to Miss Cragborne as a squatter again, I will ensure that your lack of professionalism is noted in my report to the territorial administrator." They left the clerk's office and found rooms at a boarding house on the edge of town. The proprietor, a round-faced woman with flour dusted across her apron, gave Fenna a long look, but said nothing as she handed over keys to 2 adjacent rooms. Fenna collapsed onto her narrow bed fully clothed, exhausted from 3 days of hard travel and the emotional weight of finding Marcus's letter. She had just closed her eyes when she heard a soft knock on her door. She opened it to find Liam standing in the hallway, his hair disheveled and his shirt untucked. "I could not sleep," he admitted. "I keep thinking about what happens next." Fenna stepped back to let him into the room. It was improper, she knew, to be alone with a human man in her sleeping quarters, but she found she did not care about propriety at this moment. "What do you think your father will do when we present the letter?" "He will be forced to acknowledge it as evidence and reverse his ruling." Liam ran a hand through his hair, leaving it standing up in wild tufts. "But he will not be happy about it. He will see it as a challenge to his judgment, and my father does not handle challenges well." "Will he forgive you?" Liam was quiet for a long moment. "Eventually. My father and I have always had a complicated relationship. He wanted me to follow him into law, and I chose veterinary medicine instead. He sees it as a waste of my education." Fenna sat down on the edge of her bed, suddenly feeling the weight of everything Liam had sacrificed to help her. "You risked your relationship with your father for a stranger." "Why?" Liam met her eyes, and Fenna saw something raw and unguarded in his expression. "Because watching you stand alone in that courtroom, fighting for something that was rightfully yours, was the most courageous thing I have ever seen. And because I have spent my entire adult life trying to be the kind of man my mother raised me to be, the kind who stands with people who need standing beside. And because—" He stopped, his jaw working as though he was trying to force out words that refused to come. "Because what?" Fenna's voice was barely a whisper. "Because from the moment I saw you in Marcus's barn 2 years ago, carefully bandaging the leg of a calf that had gotten tangled in wire fencing, I have not been able to stop thinking about you." The words came out in a rush, and Liam looked as surprised by them as Fenna felt. "I know that makes no sense. I know we have barely spoken before this week. But there is something about your kindness and your strength that drew me from the start, and walking out of that courtroom beside you, was the easiest decision I have ever made because it meant I could finally stop being a coward and act on what I felt. Fenna's heart was beating so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. I am an orc. You are human. Your community will never accept us. Then we will build a life somewhere that will. Liam took a step closer, his eyes searching her face. I am not asking you for anything, Fenna. I am simply telling you the truth because I am tired of hiding it. Whatever you feel or do not feel, that is your choice. But I want you to know that you are not alone in this fight, and you do not have to be alone after it either, if you do not want to be. Fenna stood slowly, her legs unsteady. She reached out and took Liam's hand, feeling the warmth of his calloused palm against hers. I fell for you the moment you walked out beside me, she admitted, her voice shaking. I thought I was being foolish, falling for a human who would never see me as anything but a cause to defend. But if you are telling me that you see me as more than that, I see you as someone I want to know for the rest of my life, Liam said. I see you as someone brave and kind and deserving of every good thing this world can offer. I see you, Fenna, not an orc, not a symbol. You. Fenna closed the space between them and kissed him, a tentative press of lips that tasted of hope and fear in equal measure. Liam's arms came around her waist, pulling her closer, and Fenna felt something inside her chest crack open and spill warmth through her entire body. They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other in the dim lamplight, and Fenna thought that perhaps the world could be different than she had always believed. Perhaps there were still miracles waiting in unexpected places. They rode back to the borderlands over the next 3 days, taking their time because neither of them was eager to face the confrontation that waited at the end of the journey. They talked during the long hours in the saddle, sharing stories of their childhoods and their dreams. Liam told Fenna about his mother's garden, how she had grown vegetables that did not belong in the harsh frontier climate through sheer, stubborn determination. Fenna told Liam about the songs her people sang during the summer festivals, wordless melodies that mimicked the calls of the plains birds. They reached the converted barn courthouse on a bright morning in early autumn, when the cottonwood leaves were just beginning to turn gold at their edges. Judge Lowell was hearing cases when they arrived, and they waited in the gallery until he called a recess. The judge's eyes widened when he saw them enter together, and Fenna watched his face harden into the same granite expression she remembered from the first hearing. "This is highly irregular," Judge Lowell said, setting down his cloth-wrapped hammer. Miss Cragborne was ordered to vacate the disputed property. Her presence here constitutes contempt of court. Her presence here constitutes an appeal based on new evidence, Liam replied. He stepped forward and placed the leather portfolio on the judge's makeshift bench. We traveled to Millstone Creek and located a letter of intent filed by Marcus Henley with the territorial clerk's office 4 months before his death. The letter explicitly states his desire to transfer the western grazing tract to Miss Cragborne. This establishes his intent as a matter of legal record. Judge Lowell opened the portfolio slowly and read through the letter twice, his face revealing nothing. The silence stretched until Fenna thought she might scream from the tension. Finally, the judge set the letter down and looked at his son. "This is legitimate evidence," he said quietly. "It changes the legal standing of Miss Cragborne's claim. Then you will reverse your ruling. I will schedule a new hearing for tomorrow morning and invite all interested parties to present arguments in light of this new evidence." Judge Lowell's gaze shifted to Fenna. "You will be allowed to remain on the property pending the outcome of that hearing, Miss Cragborne. The eviction order is temporarily suspended." It was not the immediate victory Fenna had hoped for, but it was more than she had dared to expect. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and turned to leave. Liam followed her, but his father's voice stopped them both at the door. "Liam, a word. Alone." Fenna squeezed Liam's hand once, then stepped outside to wait. She could hear the murmur of voices through the barn's thin walls, but could not make out words. She stood in the dusty yard, her hands clenched at her sides, and prayed to God. She was not sure she believed in that this would not cost Liam everything. When Liam emerged 15 minutes later, his face was pale but composed. "He is angry, but he will rule fairly tomorrow. My father has many flaws, but he is not corrupt. If the law supports your claim, he will uphold it." "What did he say to you?" Liam glanced back at the barn. "He told me that I am throwing away my future for a woman I barely know. He told me that the ranchers will boycott my practice if I marry an orc. He told me that I am breaking his heart." Fenna's chest tightened. "Perhaps you should listen to him." "No." Liam took her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing the high curve of her cheekbones. "I have listened to fear and propriety my entire life, Fenna. I am done listening to anything except my own heart, and my heart tells me that you are worth every risk." The hearing the next morning was packed with spectators, ranchers and farmers who had come to see whether the orc woman would be allowed to keep land they believed should rightfully go to humans. Fenna stood before Judge Lowell's bench with Liam at her side, his hand resting lightly on her elbow in a gesture of support that made several people in the gallery mutter disapprovingly. Judge Lowell called the hearing to order and summarized the new evidence that had been presented. He then opened the floor to arguments, and a lawyer representing a neighboring rancher stood to challenge the validity of the letter of intent. The arguments stretched for 2 hours, legal technicalities and precedents that made Fenna's head spin. But through it all, Liam stood beside her, occasionally whispering explanations of the legal jargon. Finally, Judge Lowell raised his hand for silence. "This court has reviewed the evidence presented, including the letter of intent filed with the territorial clerk's office by Marcus Henley. While it is irregular for property to transfer without a formal will or deed, the letter establishes clear intent on the part of the deceased property owner. Territorial statute allows for the honoring of such documented intent in cases where no other legal heirs exist." He paused, his eyes finding Liam in the crowd before shifting to Fenna. "Therefore, this court reverses its previous ruling. The western grazing tract formerly owned by Marcus Henley is hereby recognized as the legal property of Fenna Cragborne, subject to the filing of appropriate transfer documents with the Territorial Land Office within 30 days. The gavel fell, and Fenna felt her knees go weak. Liam's arm came around her waist, steadying her, and she leaned into him as the courtroom erupted in a chaos of voices. Some people were shouting protests, others were simply talking in shocked tones, but Fenna heard none of it clearly. All she could focus on was the solid warmth of Liam beside her and the knowledge that she had won, that Marcus's gift was truly hers. They walked out of the courthouse together into the bright autumn sunlight, and Fenna turned to Liam with tears streaming down her face. "I cannot believe it. I have a home." "You have always deserved a home," Liam said. "Now the law finally acknowledges it." They were halfway to where their horses were tied when Judge Lowell emerged from the barn and called out to them. "Liam, Miss Cragborne, a moment, please." They turned to face him, and Fenna saw something different in the judge's face, a weariness that had not been there before. He approached slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. "Miss Cragborne, I owe you an apology. I allowed the absence of documentation to blind me to the spirit of justice. Marcus Henley clearly intended for you to have that land, and I should have investigated more thoroughly before issuing my initial ruling." Fenna did not know what to say. She had not expected an apology from a human judge, had not thought such a thing was possible. You ruled according to the law as you understood it, she finally managed. The law should serve justice, not obstruct it. Judge Lowell turned to his son. Liam, I was wrong about what I said yesterday. You have not thrown away your future. You have claimed it with more courage than I have shown in years. I am proud of you. Liam's throat worked as he swallowed hard. Thank you, Father. I would like to visit your land sometime, Miss Cragborne. I would like to see what Marcus built and what you intend to do with it. If you would permit me. Fenna nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Judge Lowell gave them a small, sad smile, then turned and walked back toward the barn, his shoulders slightly bowed. Fenna and Liam spent the next weeks making the grazing tract truly hers, filing the transfer documents and repairing fences that had sagged during the months of legal uncertainty. Liam moved into the cabin with her after the first week, his arrival preceded by a wagon full of veterinary supplies and personal belongings. They worked side by side from dawn to dusk, their hands tangling together when they passed tools, their conversations ranging from plans for the herd to memories of their separate pasts that were slowly weaving together into a shared future. On a cold evening in late winter, as they sat before the fire in the cabin they now shared, Liam set down the leather journal he had been using to track the herd's breeding records and turned to Fenna with an expression of nervous determination. Marry me. Fenna looked up from the shirt she was mending, her needle frozen mid-stitch. What? Marry me, Liam repeated. I know it will not be easy. I know there are people in this territory who will never accept us. But I want to build a life with you, Fenna. I want to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to raise cattle and children and grow old on this land that you earned through your kindness and courage. If you want those things too, then marry me. Fenna set down her mending with hands that shook. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will marry you. They were wed the following spring on a clear day when the grazing tract was carpeted with wildflowers. The ceremony was small, attended by a handful of Liam's colleagues and a few of Marcus's old friends who had believed in Fenna from the start. Judge Lowell stood in the front row beside the traveling minister who performed the service, his face solemn but his eyes bright with unshed tears. When Liam kissed his bride, the judge was the first to applaud. The years that followed were not easy, but they were good. Some ranchers refused to work with Liam because of his choice of wife, but others came to respect the quality of his work and the integrity with which he conducted his practice. Fenna built Marcus's small herd into something larger and more prosperous, her knowledge of animal husbandry proving invaluable. She became known throughout the borderlands as a fair dealer and a skilled rancher, and slowly, grudgingly, the prejudice that had once defined every human interaction began to soften. 2 springs after their wedding, Fenna gave birth to a daughter with her mother's green skin and her father's warm brown eyes. They named her Kyra, and she grew up running through the long grass of the grazing tract, fearless and wild. Judge Lowell visited often in those early years, his relationship with his son fully repaired, and Fenna grew accustomed to the sight of the stern judge sitting on her porch with his granddaughter in his lap, telling her stories about her grandfather Marcus and the importance of standing up for what was right. It was in the 4th year of their marriage, during the first calving season of a new herd Fenna had purchased from a northern trader, that Fenna understood fully how much her life had changed. She stood in the birthing pen with Liam beside her, watching a heifer deliver her first calf as the sun rose over the eastern hills. The air smelled of fresh hay and new life, and Fenna felt a contentment so deep it bordered on pain. Liam's arm came around her shoulders, pulling her close. "What are you thinking?" "I am thinking that I once believed I would spend my entire life running, never belonging anywhere," Fenna said quietly. "And now I have a home, a husband, a daughter, a father-in-law who actually likes me, and a herd of cattle who depend on me. It feels like a miracle." "It is not a miracle. It is what you earned." Liam kissed the top of her head. "You deserved all of this, Fenna. You always did." Judge Lowell arrived an hour later, just as the calf was taking its first wobbly steps. He stood at the fence rail with Kyra perched on his shoulders, watching Fenna and Liam work together to clean and check the newborn. When Fenna finally emerged from the pen, her arms aching and her clothes covered in blood and birth fluids, the judge handed her a clean towel and a rare smile. "Marcus would be proud of what you have built here," he said. Fenna wiped her face and looked out across the grazing tract, at the cattle dotting the hillsides and the cabin where smoke curled from the chimney. She thought about the terrified orc woman who had stood in a converted barn 4 years ago, certain she was about to lose everything, and the human man who had walked out beside her when no one else would. She thought about all the small choices that had led to this moment: Marcus's kindness, Liam's courage, the judge's eventual willingness to admit he had been wrong. "I hope so," Fenna said. "I hope he knows that his gift changed everything." Liam took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers, and together they walked back toward the cabin where their daughter was already demanding breakfast in a voice that carried across the entire ranch. Judge Lowell followed, chuckling at his granddaughter's imperious tone, and Fenna thought that perhaps this was what home truly meant. Not just land or walls, but the people who chose to stand beside you when the rest of the world walked away. The family you built through love and stubbornness, and the refusal to let prejudice dictate the shape of your happiness. The calf bawled behind them, and its mother lowed in response, and the sun climbed higher into a sky so blue it hurt to look at directly. Fenna squeezed Liam's hand once, then released it to open the cabin door, stepping into the warm interior where bread was rising on the hearth and Kyra's toys were scattered across the floor. It was messy and imperfect and sometimes still difficult, but it was hers, earned through Marcus's compassion and Liam's unwavering support and her own determination to never stop fighting for what was right. And in the end, that was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.